polls is not going to be here. So record it with this and ask that each we're going to say roll. So just say it helps her lock in the audio. We're good. All right.
Okay, I would like to call to order the regular April 20th meeting of the Isle of Palms Planning Commission and acknowledge that the press and public were duly notified in accordance with state law. Our first item on the agenda is the approval of two sets of minutes, the first being from March 9, 2022. We have any comments?
Chairman, if you don't mind, before you get too far along, would you all just say your name and say here?
Roll call.
Roll call.
Sue Nagowski.
Ron Denton,
Marty Brown.
Steve Corney.
David Cohen.
Thank you.
okay, back to approval of minutes. Do we have any comments on the minutes of March 9 first? Hearing none, do we have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
A second?
A second.
We have a motion to second. Any more comment? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Moving on to April 14, 2022's minutes. Do we have any comments about a motion for approval?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Motions and seconds. All those in favor say aye.
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 And none opposed. So our new business order of the day, discuss the parking potential for Front Beach, and I'm sure Douglas can lead us in the conversation.
Yes. Yep. And I will say this is a fairly open-ended task. I have put in your packets for you to see the direction that you've been given. It came specifically from the Real Property Committee. And it's my belief that it was on the Real Property Committee meetings agendas as the result of a request by a prior council member, Ted Kinghorn. He had proposed, even while he was on council, kind of alternate uses of that site. And I think they were generally, given through a lens of generating revenue, generating interest in the commercial district. I think the position would generally be there's a large swath of land down there in the middle of a downtown district, and it lays barren and unused for many months out of the year. So the thought was, could it be used better than it currently is? Other than that, I don't know that there's a lot of strings attached to that analysis, other than you all kind of giving ideas as to how it may be better used. There are, for sake of a little bit of background, the property was bought after a non-binding referendum by the city. It was bought as a result of that. It ultimately was bought with funds from the South Carolina Parks and Recreation, Parks Tourist Commission, with state money. Because of the purchase using state money, there is a deed restriction tied to the property. I put that deed restriction in your packets as well for you all to see, but it generally says that it will need to be used as parking and some kind of passive park type uses. Or I think there's an opportunity to go back to them and request either to pay back whatever the money was paid for, it was paid for with, or get their approval for whatever is proposed to happen there. I will also just tell you that, in general terms, the city's zoning code does not allow any residential uses in that zoning district. There have been various uses, various commercial properties come up for sale in the commercial district. The question is always, can some type of head and bed be put up there? Can a hotel, can a condo, can, something that would give accommodations, overnight accommodations be built? The zoning code doesn't allow that. And so I would say that the existing city's code is very narrow in what it would allow in our commercial districts. Generally, commercial districts are pretty wide open, but I would describe ours as not terribly wide open. It would allow restaurant, it would allow office building, other passive, parks would obviously be allowed, municipal uses would be allowed. So that's not to say if there was an idea that came up that was a good idea, it was endorsed or embraced by the city council, they couldn't modify the city zoning code to account for some type of creative idea. It brings back to mind someone trying to do a hotel across the street from this office. At that time, it was not basically embraced, and it was my impression from the reaction to that request that, at peak times, that district is so full. Why would we want to put more people into it with more cars, more congestion? We talked, obviously, with the traffic engineer just at our last meeting about the traffic congestion problems. And really, I think those problems are most acute right at this area. The county park is a definite pinch point. That intersection that we focus so much on is just to the northeast of this property. And all of those cars are seen to be looking for a place to park. So it's an interesting question, but it's also in a very kind of critical point, as you all well know. And certainly parking is at a premium. So I'm happy to answer questions, but I think from our perspective, if you all have ideas or things to be considered, I think that would be useful. I think one of the general approaches that's been talked about regularly is asking for proposals, asking developers, hey, what would you do here if we were agreeable to a partnership? What would you dream up here? So that's kind of been thrown out as an idea, but I think the council and the staff felt like the planning commission would be a good place to just start and kick around ideas and see what your feelings are on the site. That's all I really have.
I read sorry.
Go ahead. Go.
I read the 2020-21 report that I thought was great. I wish we had that at our last meeting.
The what year?
It is 2000.
2000, this one.
2000, yes.
Master
Seaman
plan.
Whiteside, yeah.
Right.
I like their long-term plan, minus obviously their parking deck. I like the beautification plans that are incorporated into that for that area. I would hate to lose that area to anything. That area has been kind of critical during the state of emergencies and building and rebuilding, town hall. You were able to get some trailers there. If you have events and like expos, you have a place to put things. I would hate to see that taken away and used for anything else other than what it is. Like, you wanted to make it a park, that would be awesome, and beautify it, make it more aesthetic to hide that, the eyesore of parking. That would be awesome. I would discourage any sort of paving over it.
Hardened
means.
surface, yeah.
Leave it for, I like the idea of reworking some of Front Beach, some of those shops, shortening that, making the sidewalk wider in front of the shops, giving more of a walkway. I do agree that going into Isle of Palms, one of the comments they said is driving over the connector. It wasn't very aesthetic once you got to kind of the sea cabin area and those old tennis courts on the side. I agree there, but you can also increase the aesthetics with landscaping.
So I would just,
Those are my thoughts.
yeah, I would add to those thoughts in that plan, that Seaman Whiteside plan actually led to the hiring of Seaman and Whiteside to do the streetscape project that was done down there prior to that kind of central island and the angle parking. It was it must have been an 80-foot wide stretch of kind of super highway. It looked like there's a very funky rectangle of asphalt that took the place of that entire curve at 14th and Palm, and both of the roads came in actually at a different angle, at a more acute angle. So a lot of that, so the realigning of the roads happened. The city took over Ocean Boulevard as a result of that, and that streetscape project happened. So power went underground as a result of that. So a lot of stuff came of that plan, which was great. But obviously the parking deck was not, didn't get embraced at that time. And I will just say that the theory on the parking deck, and I know I've told all of you this, but it was a number crunching exercise of the prior mayor, Cronin, where he basically took the real estate on the beach per square foot available, and then did the math of existing parking spaces and assumed a number of people in each car, put that out on the beach, and made the judgment that with the existing parking, basically each person had enough for kind of half of a beach towel. If you were to double it, triple it, put multiple levels up, you get to a point where your capacity for the cars greatly outweighs the room on the beach, which we assume that that's where they're going. So you really do get to this kind of super stacking of people out on the beach. So, the idea of a parking garage just has never, I've heard it for 25 years, but it fails to get traction. But I think that's a good comment. I mean, just general aesthetic upgrades could certainly be done. I know at the staff level, we talked about, is there some kind of flexibility in the space where it could be used as some kind of open, pretty fields when it's not being parked on. I don't know what that would be, flexible ball fields or something of that nature, but I don't know. That basically a use that could go away for 3 months out of the year and then get reintroduced out there for the summer.
Like a half use.
Yeah, or temporary use. It gets set up. The one that we kind of went down a significant rabbit hole with Councilmember Kinghorn was the idea of putting RV hookups on the backside of the lot, running a sewer line, having power pedestals, basically allowing RVs to kind of pull in the off months, puts people in that area while it's not busy. So you could do it just in the off season and could fairly easily be, the pedestals stay, but all the connections kind of disappear and it goes back to parking in the summer. That was an idea that was floated. We actually priced it out. That idea didn't get traction with the rest of city council at the time.
Was Desiree going to give us parking data for that? If I recall from like the last meeting.
The number of what was that? The number of
I
spaces?
think she was going to give us the percent that parking area was full during the year, say summer months, what is the percent of fullness versus the percent of revenue?
I don't have that, but I'm sure we can get it somehow. I actually did pull that up from probably 15 years ago. I do have that. I do have it from 15 years ago. I don't know what it would, how it would relate to today.
I think that's a key element. I mean, playing into that, how much money do we make off of the parking lot? I think it's gonna come down to cost and revenue, balanced with some sort of beautification. I mean, I know it's kind of an ugly eyesore of a lot. So there's that element, but I mean, my knee-jerk reaction is that Douglas, you mentioned approaching the state Parks and Rec about purchasing the land back to where we had autonomy to do whatever we wanted to, the city that is. I think that's worth pursuing. Of course, contingent upon whatever that price tag would be, but beyond that, you know, I don't think we want to lose money on whatever we identify as future development. So I'd be interested. Do we still bid that out every year to where it's managed by a private individual?
No, it has gone to basically an automated meter. You know, there used to be somebody at the gate taking money. That no longer happens. We have the parking meters, and then the on-duty officers go through to be sure everybody in the lot's
So
paid.
it's all city employees.
It's all, yeah, city employees.
I would think that would be the baseline is
How much money?
what can we do to maintain our current revenue? Not go any lower than that, but beyond that, what can we do to increase it? Does that infringe upon beautification factor? So I think if we could obtain the property without having any strings attached in terms of how we use it, having to petition with the state, I think that would be great. If we could balance the cost and then take it upon ourselves to come up with some other ideas.
So if the city were to determine its highest and best use and was to leave it as a parking lot, would there be a need to do that in your mind? Are you saying do
Not in
that?
my mind, because
Not in my
that's
mind.
consistent with what the agreement is with the state now, that we're going to use it for recreational parking. So if that's the way we leave it, we don't need to get it back from the state.
So that might be step two. Marty, is that in line with what you're thinking, or you're thinking just maybe regardless, get that?
What do we have to lose?
No, no.
Well,
I'm
Yeah,
not saying.
I was gonna say from
open
that
up.
standpoint, if the environment now is that it's, you know, that might be possible. We don't know that 15 years from now, when the city decides they might want to do other than parking. So
Just preemptively, kind of
preemptively,
regardless maybe
Yeah,
of
yeah.
how we
again,
decide to use it, just have ownership. Not,
Strike a deal and it's a good deal. Why not? Yeah.
yeah,
But
it's
one of my,
worth finding out if it's,
I kind of agree with what's been said so far, but I also look back to what we've been asked to do and what our charter is, which is we've been asked to look at, is there a higher and better use for this property? Making a more beautiful parking lot may be the right answer, but that's not really the only thing we were asked to look at. We were asked to look at, does it make sense to do something else for this property? It's increased in value tremendously.
But it changes what's possible.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
You know, if we have a mandate for X number of parking spaces.
Right.
You could do stuff with, it means going vertical, but you could do residual work such as restaurants and shops or no one has them anymore, but offices on the second floors of street front facilities that are nested in with parking lot behind, much like King Street has done. And, you know, that you'd have to do some more number crunching again to see what that revenue base would be relative to the cost of going vertical with parking. Assuming, let's just say that lot parks 500 people and we're mandated to have that capability. It used to be these lots weren't filled but 4 weekends out of the year. Now I think it's more frequent. But there's a revenue stream that we could find out what it is. We could see, you know, what the cost benefit of going vertical, opening up more green space, and also providing a retail component now, or a commercial component. But again, you know, the same problem is you're creating a place, and it could be that intermodal center if that becomes part of the traffic plan. That could all be incorporated in that piece of property. But a couple things, are we trying to find greatest and best use in the summer? Or, my bigger concern is what do we do with that piece of land in December? To keep it from being, a barren oasis, is there a need for more restaurants or another t-shirt shop or, another ice cream store or one of those places that also would struggle in the winter and just be,
See, that's
Great.
my question. We have such a limited downtown now. The question is, if we're gonna make downtown bigger for whatever the reason over the years, that's one of those places that we can still have more retail or storefronts. So just say it's gonna be forever parking may not be the right answer. That may be that the strip along Ocean has other uses and the rest remains parking, and we have to do something to enhance the parking to keep the state happy and still have the same number of spaces, maybe vertical, maybe something else. But I think we're being asked to look at many more options other than just making it a pretty parking lot.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, what if there is no such mandate? For,
I
to
believe we
cooperate
do
with the
have
state
commercial.
for minimal parking.
Well, and
So-
then even more so, then we have less restrictions. Then we say we'll do whatever we want and we'll have 100 parking spaces.
That-
like
that's
on
all.
250. Yeah, no, I agree with you.
That's all I'm getting.
Yeah, but go ahead, sorry.
No, I'm actually interrupting. Go ahead.
I'll jump in now. Yeah, I kind of look at it and it gets back to from a planning commission. I think one of the questions that came up about was changing our ordinances to allow residential in that area. And it was, we went through and still going through the numbers. One of the things that crossed my mind is, if we're looking at making restrictions on rentals in other areas of the island, would we not do the same with the commercial to preserve the businesses? Because they're competing
Right.
against, is that property better, economically from a standpoint from the owner as a residential property than a business? And if we want to try to preserve the businesses on the island, then we need to
We have
make sure our zoning prohibits what we saw in the past of the hotels going up in places of businesses.
We lost the pavilion for
Right.
a condo hotel. And I think that's why the ordinance is what it is now, because it
Yeah.
sounded like a great idea. Who wouldn't want residences? They're quiet. Well, they're not quiet when you stack them floor high and, in a high density. So
Yeah, so that was kind of my opinion from what we've kind of seen is I personally don't think it would be beneficial to the city to add more residential housing in that area, in that commercial area.
exactly.
So,
Yeah, that's always, that seems to be the use that develops interest. When something comes available, how many units can I do? How many?
Always highest
So-
and best uses
Yeah.
residential on a beach.
So I think I'm hearing
Yeah.
that it was wise to stop that
Stop
when it
that.
got stopped because of,
But one thing, for instance, I don't have an answer to is somebody, our new Chamber of Commerce or someone else says, well, we could support 20 more storefronts on Ocean. I don't know the answer to that. If the answer is yes, then there's very few places to put them other than a place like that.
Sure.
so that kind of went back into kind of what this plan was, double stack the parking in the back half,
Right.
make
Mhm.
commercial shops. I don't know if that's viable. That's, I guess, worth looking into pursuing with some developer or how the city wants to do that. But my first opinion is I think most of the shops that are down there now are struggling because we're not like some of these other areas where there's a shopping destination. Our shopping destination is competing with also our beachfront public access. So people that are out here don't want to go to a commercial district. Like if you go to like Fernandino Beach, for example, they have a little downtown. It's not competing with all the people going to the beach. So people go downtown and spend some time downtown and shop. I have a hard time in my mind picturing that happening here because nobody wants to go down there in mid-afternoon on the weekends to shop because of the beach crowds. So would it be kind of more of a nightlife style setting on that front beach? And again, goes back to, do we have the population and the tourism here to support that kind? I don't know that kind of business, but I guess that would go back to what do we ask people to present to the city is if it's a viable that, we could put another row of, restaurants and bars and potentially shops if they think they're gonna make money on that front beach, that would actually offset and pay for the rent from those, paying for the cost of expanding and making a double deck parking lot. If somebody's presenting that, I think it'd be worth looking into it in more detail.
I don't know if I would necessarily look at double decking, double stacking parking. If you took it away to put commercial space, we're still over our limit, I believe, for parking.
Over what, which limit are you talking?
Our total spaces, just what, 8? Something.
Well, this goes back to the original purchase that we were trying to centralize parking and beach
Right.
people to this area.
Actually,
If we take that away from them, they're
Right.
just gonna, it's gonna impact the residential area. So I wouldn't agree with that we would reduce parking to make it commercial, because I think that will create a bigger problem on the island in other places.
Yeah,
That's
I
just,
agree. I'm just trying
yeah.
not to go the double stack.
I know,
route,
it's-
you know,
it's-
'cause
yeah.
At the end of the day, we are Isle of Palms.
Right.
right.
But you hide it. It's kind of what I'm
But
thinking. But, you know, if you put commercial there, you're gonna have to park that commercial. So, I don't know, commercial parking requirements on the Isle of Palms. Most places, it's one parking spot for 200 square feet of retail. So if we, did a 20,000 square feet of retail, it's, 100 parking spaces we got to come up with, that I would dare say would have to be in addition to what we were parking for the sake of the beach.
Now those commercial shops on the weekends, they're not a lot of people, like we talked about coming
Yeah.
downtown to shop. And they'll sit out there and they'll charge for beach traffic to park
Yeah.
there. So I don't know what the zoning or the covenants are with their lease along that building, but if they're selling parking spaces on the weekend, there's retail parking to be had from that.
So a couple of just comments for whatever they're worth. From the few things that have come available. Hotel, bed and head is always the first thing. Bar, restaurant is always the other kind of use that's generating some, some chatter. And kind of finally, and it seems for whatever reason that just office space out here, the Carroll building, Carroll building's been recently kind of divided among tenants and sold. And then the old building on the corner, which that became office spaces. Is that a use that's, this is so close to the ocean, it seems, Ron, I heard you kind of referencing, or somebody referencing ice cream shops and t-shirt stores. Does the city need another one of those? Does that benefit the residents on the island in any meaningful way other than maybe some licensing tax? And does it serve the community well to have more services through offices? Allow people to,
I'd move that.
I mean, that seems to be popular for, these kind of smaller office spaces seem to stay full and.
And that would have to, kind of be the thing. I mean, the Carroll building is not huge. It's in a great location for an office. Across from the beach is not bad. When my office was over there, only the second floor office had a peek of a window to the ocean, but wonderfully convenient, unless you were working on the weekend and everybody was parking in your spot. But, and I think the notion of office is just changing from in the last couple of years, instead of, a suite of, 30 people working together, you might have more of the need for an individual office space in the communal meeting conference center or something like that. That's for somebody to figure out. But I do think, it'd be desirable. There are a lot of folks, that are working from home that maybe wouldn't mind working front beach instead. In this community, it's not like, you're in North Charleston where there's already office space to spare. We don't have, an overabundance of office space here.
Any other thoughts on either office space or, am I hearing that kind of retail is,
Retail, no, I mean,
doesn't really
Me.
benefit the
food is
resident?
always good.
Food,
Food.
food or office?
That's all
I
I ever-
think-
that's all I ever think about.
What about an event space?
That's a good
What
idea.
about like an amphitheater, an indoor, outdoor concert venues managed
Don't
by the
say that.
city? Well, I mean, there's always that friendliness to
Well,
neighbors,
and
but
it's-
someplace where you could do farmers markets,
Right.
other things other than just concerts.
Yeah, and the notion is.
Communal area.
Always that those things happen at the ground. And for, I don't know how many of you live in elevated homes, once you do, you're living elevated. I would take, we did do a raised deck parking space, I would make that roof landscape and let that be your plaza where you have all your outdoor activities. I mean, you could put a swimming, the island doesn't want a swimming, but we could, but you could put a swimming pool. We already have a rec center, so you
Yeah.
don't need to replicate that, but you can have your green park up on the top of your parking space. It
I
could
think
be
you need
planted-
something with a good curb appeal. An amphitheater where you can just walk right
Yeah, well,
up.
it could be, well, it could be, a third floor amphitheater.
You could do a lot of this in the off season too, without changing very much.
Would Marty's idea of, would that allow kind of minimal ground level footprint? It could be designed in such a way that you kind of have a thing off to the corner that creates, whatever it is, a shell, I guess is, comes to mind that is there permanently and it minimally impacts the space available, but it gives off-season attraction. That might kind of fit the bill of being an attraction.
Revenue generator.
Yeah. Windjammer
People are
might get
visiting
it.
more and more in the winter time.
Yeah.
It gives
They could-
activities. You
Because
could,
they could use it all up better
you
than
say tax money for that,
stage in the
Yeah.
middle of the.
you know,
Yeah, well, you could draw, well, they already draw crowds that already swamp them, but
You can piggyback on it too.
yeah.
they could, they could say
Absolutely.
one concert here, one concert over
Mm-hmm.
there,
Festival.
festival concert.
Coachella East.
That's right.
So part of the question with what I've been asked to look at, we all have opinions and there's lots of things to look at over 20 years. Do we try to formalize more of a process and get other people involved, like with an RFI sent out to put on the street saying, we have this piece of property, come to us with ideas?
To me, it would be ideal to know, I think it's been useful to hear heads and beds is kind of off the,
Yes.
so that
Yeah.
kind of eliminates a whole swath of
Yeah.
potential interest. I would say if it was like event space, I'm sure that there are,
We could rattle off a bunch of things for an event space. It's gonna have to include parking, maybe some other open air spaces, some retail, some office, put all that in the RFI saying, come to us with a plan for this area.
These are
that
what-
incorporates these and doesn't include hotels and residential. That's a non-starter. But I think putting it out to people that do this is a way to start getting information back in that is other than just our opinion.
so would that RFI or maybe RFP, I don't know.
And,
Would it stipulate that at the end of the project, the spaces available in the summer have to be the same or more than current?
I think that's going to be ultimately a negotiating point, but that would be the ideal situation if you could actually show that you're not losing spaces, so to speak. That would go a long way to appeasing state people, I'm sure.
See, and I don't think so. I think it could be less or none, as long as we maintain that revenue.
Oh, so to you, the parking is not necessarily critical.
Correct.
I think that, personal opinion, that would be contrary to, the typical. But that's good to know. I hadn't come at it from that, in my mind, I guess I was thinking.
We're talking a lot about parking elsewhere. So I don't think this is necessarily the linchpin.
Yeah.
If there's an opportunity to develop this property and make it something useful and good, I don't
It
think we'll let
may-
that be our choke point.
The 100 spaces, 200 spaces, removes may not be the end of the world.
May or may not be, yeah.
Until DOT decides it is and they're
Exactly.
double striping Palm Boulevard.
Right.
Well, that's another discussion for another day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think, said the parking, I think ideally we would maintain the same, so that should be a, goal, I guess, of RFP, but
But if your socks were blown off with some other
a
proposal,
proposal that said, yeah, and then maybe it would be worth us looking at trying to find parking other places.
Well, I think one of the goals from the public hearing back in February of '87 was the pros of getting people out to look at this was to minimize, visitors parking on the street, centralized.
Right.
So
Well,
Marty, you're right, what you're saying, but I think if you take that away,
But that, I mean, that's how the city sold it. But even if you look at the encumbrance that was put on with the state doesn't talk about parking. They talk about beneficial outdoor recreational
Mhm.
use. That could include an amphitheater, it could include parks, it could include other things. Right now, they would argue the outdoor beneficial use is parking.
yeah. part
So
of
if we were going to take that away, we'd have to say, no, we're taking some of that away, but we've got other things we're doing out there now. We're adding parks, we're adding amphitheaters, we're doing other things. So that's really all the encumbrance is for a beneficial outdoor recreational use.
So it could be the rec center, but
Yeah.
that's
Right.
probably not the ideal, but it
Now,
could
parking
be.
is another argument with a different part of the state.
But-
Okay, but with the tourist and recreation people, that they were looking for outdoor recreational use beneficial.
right.
And they're the ones that have the deed encumbrance.
Which would be nice not to have.
Oh, it'd be nice to have. I'm not disagreeing with you, but that would go a long way to help alleviate that, to saying, well, okay, let's trade.
Yeah, but if we don't have to, then.
I'm just playing devil's advocate. I wouldn't, if I was on their side of the table, I wouldn't give it up until I knew what you're gonna do with it.
Right.
So
Well, we don't know that.
that's my point. Let's come up with a plan.
Yeah, just rereading that restriction, cannot be converted to other than public outdoor recreation uses, blah, blah, blah.
Doesn't say parking.
I was thinking that it was what we paid them, but it's actually, or what they gave us plus whatever interest. But I am seeing that to assure the substitution of other, basically, we could pay them the amount necessary to assure the substitution of other recreation properties of at least equal fair market value and of reasonably equivalent usefulness and location.
Right.
So that might be a big price tag. I hadn't thought of it that way,
Yeah.
but could be costly. So to Marty's original point, maybe that's like item number one on the hit list is what would it take? Is it, because that could, again, greatly diminish the pool of applicants. If they say, $10 million to replace that property in the current market, then it may be off the table. All right, I think, so I'm saying kind of takeaways. Figure out what it would take from the state, try to get some guidance on what it would take from the state to get it back. Would it be full market value or what would that be? I've heard no hotels, no accommodations, food, office, a potential, event space, a potential. I think I'm hearing ideally maintain same parking or more, but not necessarily a complete deal breaker. If not, get data about the amount of revenue parking lot generates. I think that was there was a guess in the packet. I think it was 400,000,
Yeah, so it's 450 somewhere in the
Yeah.
package, yeah.
but I can get better. Anything else and I would propose that I kind of try to open the dialogue with the state office. I don't know how quick that would be, but, and then am I also kind of hearing generally interest in trying to put together an RFI that would go to people who potentially would be interested.
I think part of that though goes back to, so, but before we put an RFI, we'd have to find out if the state would allow something other than outdoor recreational.
Right.
Yeah,
Um,
that might be the first step.
That might be, I mean, that
That
might
might-
be a
and that
deal
might-
breaker. We can't get over that hurdle. It kind of limits what
Yeah,
can be done.
So that goes back to Marty's item number one.
Yeah, right.
all right. And that, that may be enough to, in a month, 1 month time span to get that, just that answer might take a month.
Yeah, so what is the approach, just out of curiosity, in contacting the state? You said you'll take it upon yourself? to
Yes.
reach out,
Yep, try to find,
casually?
yes, explain the task, see what it would take, see what their reading of that deed restriction is. It's either going to be a 1 hour response or it's going to be 8 months later, after a board decision, we're going to let you know. So I'll get a feel for that, how big of a deal it is for them to answer that question. It could be a big ball of wax that takes time. So let me work on that. And I think that's good discussion for the time being. Ron, you ready to go to the next item agenda? Unless there's anything else. Anybody have any parting comments on that point? Okay.
So moving on, the next part of the agenda would be I lost it. Old
So-
business, the short-term rental analysis.
And so I would just say as kind of an introduction, I have been asked to give an update at Tuesday's council meeting for where the group is on formulating a recommendation or recommendations on this issue. Wanted to see, kind of we've been in data collecting mode for several months now. I guess I'm sensing a little bit of pressure to get off go and develop recommendations. I wanted to see what the temperature of the room was for doing that. I think ideally I would like to maybe focus on this for a minute until we can get through it, unless there's more, it took a while to get the program up, to get things kind of the wheels greased and going on it. Now at this point, if everybody's agreeable, I'd like to kind of put our heads down and come up with a direction to give to council. Ideally, I would like to say at your, have a recommendation at your, maybe the best goal would be your June meeting, because I think we're kind of coming up quickly because this meeting was pushed back on your May meeting. So that kind of gets you naturally, I think, to the June meeting, but I wanted to see what y'all's feelings were on that generally. I feel like the group has talked a lot about caps in certain areas, kind of a district, the idea of following Kiowa's model of capping certain areas. I know that's been talked about. We've generated maps and data on areas. Wanted to see if that was a possibility, if that's a direction you want to head, or island-wide cap, no change, collect data, kind of where you guys were on it.
I was curious to hear other people's opinions. I know I've dug a lot into this one, but
You're getting too close, David. You're
I know.
saying it till you're cross-eyed, I think.
I mean, my opinions right now is I think I support the zone that or areas that we've come up with having caps, because I think that does help, will prevent the encroachment of rentals. If we did it island wide, we're still going to see what's going on now is we're not seeing a growth. We're just seeing a shift into more residential areas from the front beach. And I think if that's to put a stop to that, we got to do kind of what we've kind of laid out, the individual areas and different caps depending on what area. think my biggest question is kind of, would we cap them, at what level would we cap them, where they exist now? Would we try to reduce it, or would we try to allow growth? That was the feelings, I don't know, from everybody else, if it, be interesting to hear.
I think the path of least resistance is the one that plays a cap that allows a little bit of growth.
Yeah, and that's if you recall, the Kiowa guidance, it's
Right.
what they did. It allowed them to get it in place with relatively, as Marty says, little resistance. It's worked well for them. So it was kind of my line of thinking too, that
Yeah, I think that's kind of where I was coming up with, and I'll let the others talk too. You do see a clear distinction between 1, 2, 3, 4 of the areas or so, which tend to be the higher density, and even using the Kiowa model, they didn't cap those areas that were already kind of high. They just kind of acknowledged those are the rental resort areas. We can live with that. In our case, some of the ones across, more off the front beach, more in the back of the island, we may, I think, looking at putting caps in some of those residential, say, whether it's at 6% or 8% or 10% or 15 is, we can debate. But I think having some areas that are capped either by street address or by zones makes some sense. One of the recommendations I think is important to also consider is this is only a snapshot. And you and I have had a couple emails back and forth about this. We don't have 5 or 10 years of very accurate data that shows what the trends are in many cases. So I think a recommendation has to be, to some degree, we have to step up how we look at this data, how we manage this data, what system we use. Right now, it was put together by 3 volunteers and a free database we got from somebody. That's probably not the way to manage this long term. So I think part of the recommendation needs to be, if we want to take this seriously, there needs to be a plan of how we're going to capture and manage this data going forward. Because this is, other than licenses where we have a 10 or 15-year history, the number of licenses, all the rest of this is a one snapshot time frame, essentially. And that's not necessarily good for making decisions. Also, we may want to capture other data. There are some data gaps here. We're counting on the county database for housing records, which has limits. We're trying to incorporate that with the city's spreadsheets that have some limits. So there needs to be a recommendation of saying, what is the best integrated way of capturing this data? And because to me, the biggest issue isn't the number of licenses. Because some people look at that and say, okay, the number of licenses, we got too many licenses. They haven't changed significantly in 10 or 12 years. Now, where they are may have changed. To me, what's changed a lot, again, my opinion, and I've spent a lot of time in the data, is the occupancy. It's how many people are here more than 3 or 4 months out of the year, and the number of people. And we have no data that gives us occupancy at all. How many nights is a house rented? We don't know that. So I think there needs to be some data gaps. And we can play with these spreadsheets all we want. We're never going to get that.
right.
So part of
And
this has to be our recommendation is, how do we get the next phase of data? Okay, that's my opinion.
It would be good to have Sandy, because that's been kind of a mystery, I think, and there's some science that or magic
But even
that
it's
his
not,
industry
it
uses.
doesn't need to be that hard. Now, someone who has their house on a rental program with Island or Wild Dunes or whatever, they get their annual report and shows how many nights their house was rented. All the city has to do when you do your tax form every year, say how many nights was your house rented? 100, 200, 500.
Still wouldn't know you would know
You don't know the number of people, but that's a
number of
big
people.
step beyond where we are today. Because right now, all you do is when you fill out your form, which I did, is you tell them what your revenue was. If all you put another blank on the form that says, how many nights did you rent your house? That would go a long way to helping us get towards occupancy. It doesn't tell us how many people were in that, but we know how many people were allowed in the house, because we know that on the permit.
We could kind of paint the worst case scenario and
You can
just
say on average, it's 50% occupied for 100 nights. We can't even guess that right now.
right.
So, I think there needs to be some data gaps filled and some more data gathered to make this even more meaningful than it is. But I think it's a good first stab to get to council saying, going back to what their original request was a year and a half or 2 years ago, and the panic was, the clickbait that was out there on the internet is Isle of Palms is the highest vacation rental in the country. Well, we've got a long way to say, okay, we can answer that question now, but what's the next part? How do we use this to manage going forward? So those are some of the recommendations I would say, which is this is a good first start, but there's a few data management issues and data gathering things we probably still need to add to the list to get the real information.
So that's kind of multi-pronged. Some of it is legislative, a cap.
Mhm.
Secondly, is just kind of the policy or not really, it's the administration of what you're
Right.
asking for, how you're tracking. You know, if just kind of district breakdown is not anything that's ever been regulated or analyzed in any way in the past. So just by the, when you look at what Kiowa is having to do to enforce those caps, is significantly kind of more important real time. So I think by implementing the cap alone, it's going to be a more data intensive exercise. So it will, we'll get more data just by virtue of doing that. And you can, like I say, you can see it on Kiowa's dashboard of how many licenses are left in each district, and when they change out of the district. Right now, we don't regulate anything.
And as far as we know, they've never been challenged. They haven't
No.
hit their cap. So it'll be interesting to see the first time someone goes to apply for license.
Yeah.
They say the cap's full.
Yeah,
Does that person have standing to challenge that, saying, well, you can't change the zoning. I'm allowed to do this.
yeah.
We don't know that yet because they haven't been challenged.
Let's let them hit their cap
Right, I was gonna
limit
say.
first.
But their model is
Yeah.
theirs is a very good model.
Yeah.
I would somewhat, we were using Kiowa, and the other option was like what Sullivan's Island did is go the other route.
Right.
I kind of look at it as, this is coming to us because it's apparently there are quite a number of residents that are upset with what the current situation is. So freezing it at this point is kind of like what we did with the mini hotels years ago. Let's freeze it. We didn't fix the problem. The problem's still there. It's not growing anymore, but we didn't fix the problem. So I would tend to go back the other direction, is if, should we set a cap and then allow grandfathering until we reach those caps, to reduce what apparently is irritating people today. Because I don't see that, even with the seasonal things, one of our issues is during the worst days of the summer, that's the problem we have. That's not going to get better by allowing it to not expand in other areas. So to kind of get rid of the problem, I think it's, kind of goes that we'll have to determine caps lower. And when it comes to the percentages and calculating, again, we were looking at them from a percentage, but I'm just looking at my list. If we take area 1, which currently has 68, we know where area 1 is. We can define that pretty easily. And if we say that number is now 60, we don't have to worry about calculating percentages or changeover or whatever. It becomes a hard, fast number.
I would.
That was the path of least resistance.
I understand.
Yeah.
No, that's a more aggressive approach. That's like,
That's-
resistance. I agree.
But again, some
I
of the things
agree.
we've done is, I don't think we should, cut people off right now, but, come up with a way to grandfather them in, whether only if you first come with the people who had a license before, and then until we get down to that number, that's the way they're passed out.
So I think
That's kind of my opinion, sorry.
I think you're hearing,
I'll state it.
we all generally get to the cap idea some way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
The exact, how the ordinance is written or how they decide to do that
which
is going to be a lot of.
slightly above, slightly
Right.
below current. I mean, it sounds like
right.
it's, I guess my mind goes to if you are to, I think part of the beauty of the Kiowa ordinance is it was a low pressure situation when you kind of, and I would say, maybe artificial is a bad word, but when you put this kind of sacred token with a business license and a rental license, to me, it creates issues. I mean, it creates issues to, you know,
I agree. I mean, yeah,
It's a-
we see it in the other areas that have done like similar things. This doesn't go over easily.
and in your example of 68 in the district, in my opinion, to set the cap at 78 is kind of a no problem. To set the cap at 10 lower than that, at 58, it's only a difference of 20 units, but
It's a
The-
big difference. in
it's a
how it
big
comes
difference
across.
administratively in how it gets,
Yeah.
you know, in the kind of all of it. It's ability to survive public scrutiny at, you know, at public hearings to get implemented.
Yeah.
I think it makes it a significantly harder hill to get over for a difference of 20 licenses, my personal opinion. Any thoughts from you all about caps? Seems to be,
I like the zones. I agree.
you like the idea of a cap
I like
per
the zones.
zone?
I think that they're going in the right direction. I don't know if I would set them at what, 10 lower or 10 over.
But generally divided up among
Yes.
regions and
As a-
Ron?
As a starting point. I mean,
Yes.
again,
Yeah.
because there are problem locations and, you know, we know where they are. That's not really in this data because the data is just about rental places. For years, there were a couple of bad eggs on 41st Avenue. Only I knew because I live on 42nd. It was my wife who inundated the livability police with all those calls. But, you know, is that a real problem? You know, it was for us until we got a white noisemaker for our bedroom. But, you know, so, you know, where the problems are generally beachfront, you know, the zones. And so I think we just have to, you know, consider that those zones when doing our limitations, you know, I think to get things from going out of hand, there probably does need to be a cap. I never thought I would say that, but I think it's more important to be careful with where you zone. I think, you know, we heard a lot of stuff for years, people that were in the neighborhood, so to speak, who would be more impacted by a vacation rental than, you know, people on zone one, for instance, where, you know, a much larger percentage might be short-term rentals. You know, you almost gave up the zone, some people were saying, and they would get really upset that we weren't trying to protect them too, but it's not that we're giving up on them. You know, people find these places or the developer or homeowner has positioned their properties to be used in such a way that, you know, leads to that inevitability. You know, I would rather, you know, not see Forest Trail, for instance, go down the path of, you know, large quantities of short-term rental. One, doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but two, those are quieter neighborhoods that would really, you know, be impacted by, you know, the 12-person family who's, you know, hooting and hollering at 2 a.m. because it's Saturday night and they just checked in.
Yeah.
You know.
No, I agree. And I think that's why the zone concept, whether these are the
I've
exact
always been a
lines or
fan of
not,
zoning.
we can debate the exact lines or the
Right.
exact street, but I think that there are clearly different types of zones on the island, and I think you have to acknowledge
And I
that.
think in our recommendation has to be a movable scenario as data changes. You know, these are our assumptions. It's not something that we don't think needs to be revisited when new data comes in.
Well, that's why I think it's important to have
Yeah.
annual data that keeps getting
Right.
refreshed and looked at and gets to the issue of occupancy and other things happening too, which we really don't have right now.
So is our end result simply pick a number? We know where we're at, pick a number for each zone with a huge caveat that we need to sharpen our pencils and get the policy nailed down before we try to implement anything. Is it that easy or do we need to try to? get
I
into
think it's that easy. Yeah, I think there are comments made about, you know, administration, kind of what can be done to make this easier the next time it's asked of you in terms of data collecting, but I kind of am envisioning a fairly simple amendment to the code that has a map and has a number associated with each district in the map.
So, and it's not arbitrary. When we had a plethora of 11-bedroom plus houses, like designed a few of them, we had a frank discussion of what is a reasonable size house that would fit the market and the values of the community. And not to hamstring those people who had already made that investment, but moving forward, yeah, there was a little bit of blowback. But we really cut down on the mini hotel and and maybe haven't necessarily decreased the size of some of these homes, but they certainly are from a bedroom standpoint more intimate. So it's the same process here in thinking. Any decision starts arbitrary and then gets rationalized. But that's essentially what we have to do. Essentially pick a number and see if we can find a rationality as to why. I don't know that we can get to it the other way around.
So one of the other ones, I'll throw this one out, is getting people think about it. I did. Would we possibly change the occupancy rate for the different zones?
That's a good idea.
That got back to your question of, we're still seeing these turnover of smaller homes to bigger homes. So
I've recently have
if anybody else has not thought about it, think about it.
3-bedroom homes in parts of the island I would never thought would be rental, and really don't know how successful they would be, but you could limit that quantity. Is it always going to be 2 people per bedroom plus 2? And maybe it's not in the back reaches of the island. To keep that down. I don't, it's just.
So Ron was, just for the benefit of the group, the different tiers of occupancy, if you predate the zone, there was kind of no limit there for a while, then it was 2 per bedroom plus 2, or a calculation of your overall house size. And then for any new home, it caps at 12. Maybe, what kind of comes to mind is that cap for new homes, maybe for some of the districts caps at 8, 6,
Right.
some other number.
Yeah. And again,
That would be an easy enough, and I guess the sentiment at the time was, if you have a house, you're renting it, you've kind of, you have a proven track record of.
I think we should kind of look at that grandfather clause from then. I mean, because going through this data, there are houses that dropped off the rental market, then turned back onto the rental market because of the way it was written.
Yeah.
They were able to come back on as 18 rentals,
Yeah.
even though 3 years they were a single family home.
Yeah, it has the code has a
Day.
literally a day, whatever your status was in June 2010. I don't know what the day is, but I should know. But whatever. So we go back to that kind of, I will say, from an administrative standpoint, we have a list,
Right.
and we don't have to kind of, follow do a deep analysis of every time a new one comes on. If it was on that list, it's at a number. So it's easy for us.
But getting to their 2 point, I think that's something that's kind of secondarily looked at. Once you say, okay, these areas on the back of the island, the more neighborhood areas, we're going to cap at whatever the number is, 15, 20, 25, 5%. And also that you can only have a maximum of 8 people. Because in some of these residential areas, even though they have 12 people, is a lot of people. So you may just say, no, in some of these residential areas, no, you're capped at 8 people on a rental license. You can build as many bedrooms as you want.
Right.
But the license will only allow 8. So
Yeah.
it could be kind of a 2-piece
I
quota.
I do sense that the concern, I think, in the rental ownership community would be the very back of the island, or waterfront homes, large, that I'm sure that for them to generate revenue, they would want it to be more people, a higher occupancy level, but that's just food for thought. That could generate some pushback. I don't know how many are on the backside, but I know they're big houses.
There's a few.
There's a few. I was just thinking, well, we could look that up because
Yeah.
I think we have the data, but.
Well, as always, there may need to be some give and take in
Yeah.
finalizing this.
Yeah.
So,
Well, again, in my view, the existing ones, kind of the
Stay.
way it was done before, the
Yeah.
existing
Right.
ones stay, they,
It might
But
take
any
20 years for
future-
them to fall off, but.
Right.
right.
Yep.
So
So what does council want from us? Just a report from you?
yeah,
They
so
want
I'm,
something?
I would like to report, my plan would be to report kind of a timeline.
Okay.
Does your June meeting, so if that would have me giving you a draft at your May meeting of this for discussion, if you wanted to have, if at that meeting, we're kind of so far apart to need a special meeting, we could do that to finalize a recommendation at your June meeting. Does that sound
Yeah.
reasonable?
So I was thinking something more akin to a workshop, just inter-commission workshop where we're not in a formal row, but back in the old
Yeah,
Yeah.
tables. Maybe somebody can bring a computer that can hook up to that screen and we can, you know, get
Do the
into
zones.
program and pick zones and get some information and kind of hash out some of the nuts and bolts together, you know, I think could be helpful. And just not. Did I mention? And beer, lots of it. But, you know, I think that would be an easier way to work than, you know, this has been kind of, I'm sure, helpful for publication, but it's a little different from how we're used to working in a, you know, more square, more relaxed environment. Just to hash out things and think them through a little bit more, this is a little more formal.
I mean, I think we could come up with like, we know kind of basically what the
Yeah.
current,
yep.
what's current there. And then again, it's like, here's a low, here's a high. Here's our opinions and give it to council.
Right.
And these are the other, you know, like, I think we've thrown around and we'll probably come up with a few other additional recommendations.
So in terms of what I was going to report, general kind of consensus around the idea of a cap in some form and the cap being zoned in some form. Other administrative recommendations about data collection, things to potentially add in the permitting process about occupancy levels to try to zero in on that. And a potential report date at their June meeting. Does that sound doable to everybody?
Very reasonable.
That sounds like a plan. Next one's gonna be short, Ron.
Yeah, my screen went blank. Didn't print out the agenda.
Well, the next thing is discuss the comprehensive plan. I don't have any update there. You met with Stan Tech. My hope was to have work on the transportation element done for you to look at today. I don't have that. Hopefully for our next meeting, we'll have that. Thought that was a good, interesting presentation. It kind of got the wheels churning about creative ideas.
So can we have a refresher on that? Just for my forgetfulness.
On
So we
the,
picked like 5 or 6.
Yes.
Right.
yes, kind of priorities. So my takeaway was that, yes, there were 5 or 6 kind of, here are what we would consider.
Some near term, some long term.
And then I think the suggestion was a good one to refer to an appendices in appendix, I guess, in the plan. That was all of it,
The complete report.
the complete report.
That's what
Yeah. It's a short version. I think that captures it all.
no, that's good. Thank you.
The other miscellaneous. business.
So miscellaneous business, would you all, I guess, news is that you lost a member. It'll be a couple months, I would expect, till you have a replacement member. The member you lost was vice chair person. Do you all want to, should I put that on the next agenda?
Yeah,
For
for
not-
nominate Sandy. He's not here.
He'll be here
That's
next month.
exactly why. you do that
Yeah.
when he's not here.
We want to add that, add that to the
I'm brave
agenda.
enough to do that without being here.
Do you want to wait till the new person's on board to do that? You want to just do it next month? Just do it next
No,
month? You're
just-
probably not going to make the brand new person.
That would be quick.
Yeah, that would be abnormal punishment.
Well,
Yeah.
why don't we just do that? Then?
Wait till the,
Just deny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
all right. Everybody's good. I'll put it on next month's agenda. That's all I have, Ron.
Okay.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Uh,
Aye.